Have a seat. I'm not going to begin this as if it was a sermon, as is my practice, my annual address for the annual meeting I give here in church. And so, it's a tough time to be Christian. In some respects, our era is similar to the first few centuries of the church. And perhaps the Alexamenos graffito that serves as today's handout sums up our era's attitude toward Christianity. This particular, what you have in your hand, is a rubbing of Roman graffiti scratched into the wall of a room near the Palatine Hill in the city of Rome. Scholars date it to around 200 AD. The graffiti roughly translates Alexamenos worshiping his God, and it is obviously mocking Christians. What idiot worships someone who was crucified? I kind of think that kind of sums up the era that we live in. New England is one of the most secular areas of the country. Bishop Fisher frequently quotes, and I've always taken him at his word, I've never double-checked it myself, that 80% of New Englanders do not attend religious services of any kind. So it's a tough time to be Christian, it's a tough time to be a church leader. But this reality existed before I got here and when I came in November of 2010. I remember that time, and I want to talk a little bit about it. At the time, the diocese wanted me to come and heal what they thought was a conflicted and declining parish. The vestry wanted me to come and lead them to proclaim the gospel of Jesus Christ. What I found was a parish like most others that had weathered the same kinds of issues the Episcopal Church had been facing across the country. And the people I met here had no intention of throwing up their hands and giving up. They didn't want a chaplain, which is a good thing because I stink at that. It's just not my calling. And what is my calling? What is my sense of calling? It's been a while since I've talked about it. My call to the priesthood was clear and unambiguous. The Lord specifically called me to be a preacher. In the Episcopal Church, that meant ordination to the priesthood. But even more specifically, the Lord said, "Preach my word." The language I heard was Johannine, from the Gospel of John. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. The Word is Jesus. It was crystal clear God was calling me to proclaim Jesus as Lord and King over all creation and the church. But I need to say what I mean by Jesus. Whenever our language for God can't be assumed that we all think or mean the same things when we use the same words. What I mean, first of all, is there is no difference whatsoever between the so-called Christ of faith and the Jesus of history. The incarnate, risen, and ascended Jesus of Nazareth stands at the very heart of the doctrine of the Trinity. Somehow, at the center of our one undivided Creator God, who is sovereign and always other than creation, and therefore, by definition, neither male nor female, at the center of this God is the man who was raised bodily from the dead, appeared bodily to his disciples, and ascended bodily to the right hand of the Father. If you want a God you can completely understand, Christianity is not for you. Wherever Jesus Christ is disembodied, spiritualized, and spread out over creation like butter on bread, that's where Christianity stops and something else begins. That's what drives me. I confess that I sometimes feel lonely in this calling. A focus on Jesus smacks of fundamentalism these days. And the church is not immune from the polarizations and dichotomies infecting the U.S. And one of the dichotomies that I've seen and struggled with is between what is called inclusion on the one hand and what I'll call creedal orthodoxy on the other. The latter refers to a set of core beliefs that have universally been believed by Christians from the very beginning, and those beliefs are summarized in both the Apostles' and Nicene creeds. The assumption in the Episcopal Church, at least my perception of it, is that embracing the content of the creeds and engaging in the church's tradition is incompatible with, say, women and LGBTQ people having full access to the sacramental life and leadership of the church. For several years now, I have sometimes felt alone in my belief that this is a false dichotomy. And then on January 2nd or 3rd, I came across a new online magazine started by young Episcopalians, lay and ordained, called Earth and Altar Magazine. If you go looking for it, it's important that you include magazine. There is apparently several other earth and altars out there. I read the opening op-ed from the editor-in-chief, Chris Corbin, and I was stunned and overjoyed. I just want to share a few sentences from it. He identified the magazine with what he describes as a growing movement of people committed to, wait for it, inclusive orthodoxy. He wrote, "We feel a tremendous energy generated by real experiences of God as actually sovereign over the cosmos, and by our being radically transformed for the better because that God actually became human, lived among us, died, and was raised from the dead. The institutional church is good, but only insofar as it invites others to have such transformative encounters." And all of this points to the fact that even the stated purpose of carving out a space to discuss and promote inclusive orthodoxy only matters if it helps make more room for people to have freeing, forgiving, healing, and sanctifying encounters with Jesus Christ. Now, forgive me if all that sounded like a digression, but it wasn't. What Chris Corbin wrote applies to the mission and identity, in my opinion, of any congregation. If parishes are not driven first and foremost by a vision for making more room for people to have freeing, forgiving, healing, and sanctifying encounters with Jesus Christ, then they've replaced his gospel with something else. I accepted the call to Christ Church because the people I met believed that Jesus is the head of the church, and nowhere did he say we are called to build silos from which baptisms, weddings, and funerals are launched. Now, every church's mission begins with worship. Everything and anything else that is done by Christians in churches can probably be done by almost anyone else. Worship defines us. We're defined by our worship of the God to whom all hearts are open, all desires known, and from whom no secrets are hid. And those opening lines in our Eucharist then send us on a trajectory that concludes with the same God sending us out to do the work we have been given to do, to love and serve God as faithful witnesses of Christ our Lord. And all of that is the soil upon which our core values spring up. They appear on our website, on the front cover from time to time. Paula does a really good job of sort of changing them every now and again, but to remind you what they are, our core values are passionate and joyous worship of God, love for the searching and the hurting, willingness to do what it takes to follow Jesus as Lord, and commitment to one another. We've gone through a remarkable transformation since November of 2010. On the other side of your handout, on the other side of the Alexamenos graffito, is a photograph that appeared on the front page of the Sentinel and Enterprise on June 27th, 2012. The night before, here at this church, the vestry had decided to take a risk and create a full-time position for family ministry. Now, the atheist will see an image created by refracted light passing through water droplets in the air. I saw something that every Christian who has ever prayerfully agonized over a major decision has asked for, wished for, longed for, or pleaded for. A sign from God. Fast forward to 2019. It's often hard to measure the impact of ministry by sheer data. Our average Sunday attendance, which is the only statistic I really pay attention to because it represents people who are actually in the pews, last year it increased 22%. Now, 1 year doesn't make a trend. Like I said, it's a tough time to be Christian. But another measure or gauge for effectiveness is spiritual vitality. That sense of high morale and joy and enthusiasm that I see in people's faces from week to week. Now, I can't share everything that I see, but here's just some of the things that I see that contribute to the vibrancy and life at Christ Church. Robert's dedication, not just from week to week in terms of the choral music life of the church, but his dedication to large-scale choral offerings and concerts, the RSCM program for youth, and his desire to make the most out of the two major feasts of the year, Christmas and Easter. And by the way, Robert's recordings of the choir attract the most attention online based on view counts. I'm not even sure I'm second. Carolyn is, okay. That's a good thing, by the way. I'm just pleased as all get out about that. Dana Goodwin, by the way, has upgraded our ability to record the choir through the sound system. And recently, some of those recordings have been posted online, and I think they're astonishing. If you haven't heard them yet, you need to go and find them and listen to them. Carolyn's efforts with the music camp, the children's choir, and the band. Regarding the latter, Christ Church has been able to achieve something that most Episcopal churches find next to impossible if they even want to try, which is the blending of traditional and contemporary music in Sunday worship. And that is the direct result of Robert and Carolyn's collaboration. More importantly, both give leading God's people in their praise and worship of our Creator King the highest priority. And the way they work together, that's not the kind of thing you can concoct. I think the effort that we put into the weekly bulletin, which is specifically designed to make it as easy as possible for a visitor to follow along in worship from day one. And if you forgive me for a second, let me just add, if you're concerned about the amount of paper that we go through each week to print the bulletin, then I invite you to bring one of these. And look, now it's going to say Siri. I don't want Siri. Download the bulletin and use it on your device. I know it feels out of place. It does to me too. It's only because it's new and strange. And if you forgive the terminology, our online marketing, I think, is having a positive effect as well. Quite a number of years ago, at an annual address, I shared my vision for creating what I called a digital glass door for people to peek inside and see who we are and what we do. And let me just say, if it isn't obvious to you, it might not be. If you've been Christian for any length of time, you look at a church and you're like, oh, that's a church. But if you look at this building in particular and compare it to any public building, there's something missing. Glass doors. Every public building that you ever walk into has a glass door, and that's intentional. Because when you can see inside, you're drawn into it. The problem is that even if we wanted to put glass doors into our church, they would peer in and see nothing. They'd see a vestibule over there and a vestibule over there. So we have to figure out a way to make ourselves visible to people. And so Robert's timeless pursuit of offering recordings of the choir, the video of our sermons, my attempts at theology over easy and what we mean to say, Paul Licatel's commitment to excellence in digital and tangible publications, the website, the Facebook, those are the digital, banners and brochures, those are the tangible, just some of the tangibles. I think between all of this stuff, we are reaching people, and they are slowly entering the church because of the windows we've created. And again, it's hard to know whether it's having the desired effect. I do know one person who I don't see right away, so I'm not going to point this person out, said to me that they came precisely because of a What We Mean to Say video where I talked about what it means when the church says that the Episcopal Church welcomes you. And there is so much that you contribute to Christ's church in treasure and time and talent. The windows don't matter, right? Digital windows don't matter if there's nothing to see. So there's so much to point out. I'm just picking 3 things. The Sunday school, each week, takes a great deal of time and patience, and sometimes there's one child, and maybe sometimes slightly more. It's the dedication of our teachers, Colleen Bedard, Cheryl Borgalt, and Pamela Hill, that adds life to the parish. The sound team, who right now consists only of Tom Bedard and Jack Cattell, they are every bit as vital to the worship as the choir, the band, the readers, or I am, and their ministry raises the age-old question, if there's a joyful noise unto the Lord in a church but no one can hear it, does it matter? And there's a group of people who are here all the time and I don't think are ever singled out. Acolytes. We're blessed with a multi-generational group of acolytes. Greg, Grace, and Chris Roy, Tiffany Hallett, Alicia Cornier, Don Chase, Cassidy and David Callahan, Greg Palladian, Lisa Folding, and Matthias Cantor, who bailed us out last December From Darkness to Light. And like every ministry I can think of, it's perpetually understaffed, which means that on any given Sunday, any one of those people could walk into the church and find out that they need to serve whether they were scheduled or not. And yes, finally, I'll take a little bit of credit. I think my sense of calling as a priest and leader tills the ground for all of these things and more to happen. The point to drive home is that digital glass doors don't matter if the people who look in don't see joyous and passionate worship of God, love for the searching and the hurting, a willingness to do what it takes to follow Jesus, or commitment to one another. Now, I want to shift gears a little bit and say something about financial stewardship and our endowments. Stewardship. Parishes in the Episcopal Church have for decades and decades relied on annual fall campaigns to encourage people to make a pledge to their church. And those pledges, in turn, are what vestries have relied on when planning the next year's budget. Not long after my ordination, I became a stewardship consultant in the Diocese of Alabama, which back then, we're talking 1980s, late 1980s, was known for its stewardship program called the Alabama Plan. Later, I was chair of the stewardship committee for the Diocese of Missouri. I was a consultant to vestries all through that time, other churches. And to make a long story short, my experience with these annual campaigns has been the very definition of the moose principle, which comes from the story about 2 hunters that hire a pilot to take them out to hunt moose. They get out to the clearing and they get out of the plane and the pilot says, all right, I'm going to come back in a week, and when I come back I want to see two hunters and 1 moose. The hunters are like, right, got it, 2 hunters, 1 moose. Plane takes off. A week later, plane comes back in. There at the end of the clearing are 2 hunters and 2 enormous moose. The pilot gets out and says, guys, I said 2 hunters, 1 moose. We can't do this, small plane, you know. And the hunters are crestfallen. They're trying to argue about whether they should take take both of the moose. Our wives are never going to believe us if you don't let us take the 2 moose. And finally, one of them says, hey, wait a minute. Last year, we had a plane just like this one, and that pilot let us take 2 moose. Pilot thought for a moment and said, okay, if you did it last year, I guess we can do it this year. So in with the 2 hunters, in with the 2 moose, start the plane up, turn it around, the plane shudders down the runway, takes off, barely misses a clump of trees, and then right into the side of a mountain. Plane everywhere. Moose everywhere. And they stagger out of the plane, and one hunter says, where are we? And the other one says, I think we're about a half mile farther than we got last year. And of course, the moose principle is merely a more violent illustration of the definition of insanity. Doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. And I think it was at a meeting of the vestry in 2018. Can't remember exactly when it was, but I finally confessed my frustration. I discovered that many, not all, but many, felt the same way. And so last year, we didn't have a campaign. We didn't have a campaign in 2019 for this year. But it would be a mistake to assume that our approach means we don't think stewardship is important. It is of utmost spiritual importance. And the basic concept is like this. It's really not all that hard to grasp. God is a giver. In case that isn't immediately obvious, creation itself, especially us as human beings, is not a divine act of necessity, but an act of love. And it was God's love for all humanity that he chose Israel to be his people. God promised first to Abraham and then to his children in Genesis 12:3, 18:8, 22:18, 26:4, and 28:14 to bless all the nations of the earth through them. And of course, this history of salvation through a particular people culminated in God's supreme gift of himself in Jesus Christ. And secondly, Scripture tells us that we're created in God's image. That means we're created to reflect God's loving generosity into the world. There's no part of our lives that is exempt from this. Still, I have to stress that the theological motive for giving is gratitude and is derived from the fact that God is a giver. Now, back when I was doing consulting work, so this is going way, way back, there was one of those kind of one-frame cartoons, and it was the picture of an usher with the alms basin and someone sitting in the pew like this. And the caption was, God loveth a cheerful giver, but he accepteth from a grouch. The church treasurer might, but how does that reflect God's image? Creation is not a divine act of duty or obligation, but of love. Simply put, we are most like God. We most accurately bear God's image when we give in gratitude and joy for who God is and what God has given us. And in 2019, I can't say yet whether it's the result of our non-stewardship campaign, stewardship campaign. In 2019, giving increased a modest 9%. Thank you. Our endowments. The vestry and I are well aware that our draw on the endowment is high. A significant proportion of the annual draw over the past 9 years has been needed for critical capital improvements. Since I've been here, so 2011, we replaced 2 83-year-old boilers. They were behemoths, built at a time when no one cared how much oil they burned. The knob and tubing wire. Now think about that. I'm not an electrician. I know knob and tubing wire is bad. It's a fire hazard. The knob and tubing wire in the church, the foyer, the guild hall were replaced. All the lights in here now are LED, and the canister floodlights are new. They weren't in here, and I don't know if anyone can remember what it looked like before those were put in. When they finally came on, I'm like, wow, we have a Raredas. I'm only partly joking because suddenly I could see detail that I'd never seen before. And the roof. Ah, yes. The roof. It's in a perpetual state of repair. I think it's, we're a whole city block. We're an entire city block. I've seen the roof from the air, by the way, thanks to Tom Bedard, who took some photos of the church with a drone. And I'm looking at areas of the roof, and I'm thinking, that doesn't look like it was designed to repel water. It looks like it's designed to collect it. I mean, really, we got all these roof angles coming in. It's really fascinating. And not as critical as these, or I should say critical in a different way than these other things, a new sound system was installed, and we had to pay for it from the endowment. We were able to decrease our draw in 2019 by about $25,000, but that was because most of these critical repairs had been completed. But make no mistake about it, this building is huge and old, and more necessary repairs are sure to come. In 2019, the total value of our endowments increased slightly more than $300,000, even after taking into account a draw of roughly $325,000. Now, the but is, of course, what goes up eventually comes down. None of us can predict the future, but downturns are always a matter of when, not if. The vestry and I are well aware that when the day comes, difficult decisions will have to be faced. I think it's also important that we be reminded from time to time that almost 50% of our endowments are in restricted funds. Restricted endowments are both a blessing and a problem. I mean, for example, several years ago, Carolyn was our interim organist, and she discovered a mountain of sheet music. We had duplicates upon duplicates upon duplicates of the same scores of music. Turns out we have a fund restricted to sheet music. Hence, on many occasions, new copies of the scores we already owned were purchased. By the way, we don't do that anymore. The restricted endowment is about, a total is about $1.4 million. And I've ranked them in order based on the end of the year amounts in each of these funds. 28% is for family ministry, none of which can be used for salaries, by the way. 14% is for music, of whether it's sheet music or maintenance or whatever. 13% is for Sunday school. Another 13% is restricted to camperships. Another 11% is restricted to the rector's housing. And another 11% is restricted to the rector's discretionary fund. Now, those latter two, almost certainly the rector's housing was created at a time when churches owned the rectory. And so the money probably went to things like maintenance of the rectory. Now it goes to offset what's called the rector's housing allowance, which, by the way, is not a perk. It's simply, if you imagine the salary as being one big pie, the clergy can, for IRS purposes, declare whatever amount it is to be housing. And whatever that amount is, we can pay for some of it from this fund. The rector's discretionary fund, every church has a rector's discretionary fund. It's required by canon law. And in most churches, the way it's funded is the first, a collection one Sunday a month is designated for the rector's discretionary fund. We don't do that. You've never heard us talk about it because it's endowed by a lot. I don't think I've ever even taken the full 5% out of these funds. The remaining 10%, by the way, is distributed among funds with balances in the low four figures. If you are considering including Christ Church in your estate planning, on behalf of the entire vestry, please direct it to the general endowment. That is where it is needed. And my point in this overview is to emphasize that while we've done away with an annual pledge drive, your financial support to Christ Church matters a lot. And I can't thank you enough for your generosity. Yes, it's a tough time to be Christian. My vision is to continue to provide numerous digital glass doors through which people can see what goes on inside these walls. More importantly, I want to continue to encourage and affirm the energy and creativity of the staff and other ministry leaders. Without them, without you, there wouldn't be anything worth looking at. It all matters because in today's world, that person who suddenly feels a spiritual stirring, or that lonely, isolated person who left the church because she wasn't welcomed but for whatever reason decides to give it another try, or that person who has never believed in God but suddenly is grappling with questions unanswerable by math or test tubes and wondering if there is more. Everyone who decides to give church a try for whatever reason, the first thing they do is they go to their computer or their handheld device and they Google churches near me. My vision is to lead Christ Church to do what we've been working towards the past 8 years to the best of our ability for as long as we can, for as long as God provides. Because I'm a lousy chaplain and Christ Church is no silo. Thank you.